Good afternoon. Welcome to today's broadcast of the VRS Warrior Wallet. As always, Kevin Laurer, uh, mortgage broker extraordinaire, is here to join us. Um, Wanted to talk about something today that came up, and there's a social media post that came up that is talking about a woman has her boyfriend move into a house that she owns, and she's owned for a year, and on the thing he wants to be on the title of the house because they're going to pay more. He's going to be paying, contributing to the home, and it's brought up a huge debate about that, about when to add your spouse or your girlfriend or your significant other to the deed or the title or to the mortgage, even if you're not married. What would your I know what my opinion is, and then what would you say to that? What how would you address that?
Yeah, that's kind of scary territory there. It's one of those things where it's going to be it's case by case situation. I mean, there's so much turnover in relationships nowadays where people get together, they break up, and I mean, if it's an existing purchase that someone made before they were with this person, I mean, they're if they were living on their own, they'd be paying rent, and they don't get to be on the title of a property they're paying rent on. So I mean, that's totally something where it's going to be up to the owner of the home, and how serious they are with their relationship. I mean, if you add somebody to the title and then you break up, are they going to easily want to come off? I mean, me personally, if I was in a relationship like that, I would have to know absolutely 100% without a doubt before I'm going to add someone onto the title of my house. I wouldn't do it personally. It's too much of a risk. And then, depending on how the breakup is, if it's a heated argument and it's a bad breakup, that person's then on the title of your home, and who knows if you're going to be able to get them off. So
Right.
if they're not on the mortgage, they didn't help you buy it. I wouldn't do that. It's just they're going to have a cost of living, whether they're paying rent to somebody or whether they're contributing to their significant other mortgage payment. I mean, it's in a healthy relationship. I don't really think that that's something that should be an issue anyway. I mean, if you're with somebody and everything's good, why are you going to make an issue over whether you're on the title of the home or not?
Well, here's my question today, and this is a question that to address is, if you're and there's less people getting married. Honestly, there are less and less
Yeah.
people getting married today. If you are not if you're not getting married, what would you say to people about cohabitating, and saying to someone, if you're going to go buy a house together, what would you recommend? Would you be jointly on the mortgage, um and would you be jointly on the mortgage, or would you just have the um one person responsible and then have some kind of agreement on selling on the proceeds of the house?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's going to be a case by case situation. I mean, I have couples all the time that aren't married, where they both want to be on the loan. I have situations where people are married and sometimes we don't put both people on the loan. I mean, it kind of comes down to what you're qualifying for, where people's credit scores are, where the income is. I mean, for VA, if you're not married and you don't want to do a down payment, then only the veteran can be on the mortgage. So
Right.
unless you're married, you can't have the other person on the mortgage. There is a loophole to that where if you do enough of a down payment, then you can have a co-signer who's not a veteran. But it's just a case by case situation. So for example, I mean, for a loan that's not VA, I've had people who are married where if both people are on the loan, if credit score is good and they can both be on the loan, sometimes it's more beneficial to only have one person because there's programs out there that have income limits. So if you combine the income and you're over that income limit, then sometimes it makes sense to only put the one person on the loan. But, Ohio specifically is a dower state, meaning if you're married, the other person has to go on title unless you choose to sign off on the dower, and that person still has to go to closing. So if you're married, then you're both going to be on title no matter what, unless you do extra paperwork. Now, if
Really?
you're not married, yeah. So you have to, if you have a spouse, you're legally married. The other person isn't necessarily going to be on the mortgage, but they're going to be on title unless you sign off on that paperwork. So it happens a lot.
How often does this happen? I mean, how often do you see? Let me ask you this: as somebody that's you work across the United States, how often have you seen people move into non-married? Let's just use this as
it happens a lot. It's very common.
That
and I get phone calls sometimes a year or two later where they break up and the other person wants to go and qualify for their own home. So the problem there, if you're not in that relationship anymore and you're a co-signer on the mortgage with the other person, so you now have that mortgage debt in your ratios. So it's harder for that person to then qualify by themselves for their own purchase. So if you're just on title, meaning that you're not on the mortgage, but you were in a situation where you're on the title of the property with your ex, the mortgage payment's not going to count against you, but the property taxes and homeowners insurance and that stuff's going to count against you if you're on title for another property. So I mean, if people can afford to do it on their own when they're in a relationship, and if you're not married, I mean, I typically tell people to just do it by themselves, because you never know what's going to happen down the road. I mean, if a breakup happens, it's much easier to move on and not have to refinance a house. I mean, if somebody's on the mortgage with you and you split up, the only way to get that person off is to do a refinance and do it in just one person's name. If they're on the mortgage, you can't just pull them off title. You have to refinance the loan, and then you have to qualify by yourself. So if you're buying a more expensive home, you're not married, and you put your significant other on the loan so you can qualify for more, trying to refinance then, say a year or two later, if you break up, the one person might not qualify to refinance that property solo. So then you're in a situation where you need the other person's income. So I've had it before where that's happened with people, and they end up having a relative or a parent or a family member they'll have to co-sign to get their now ex off of the loan so they can still qualify for that mortgage by themselves. So I mean, as far as my opinion, my advice, however you want to phrase it, I mean, if you can qualify by yourself without putting them on there, I mean, I think that's the smarter way to do it. It can create a lot of issues down the road if there's a breakup, and just make your life more difficult with trying to get them off of the property. There's costs associated, of course, with a refinance. If let's say you bought 6 months or a year ago and rates are really, really low, you're sitting at a 3%, 2.5%, whatever you were, and then you do this breakup and you got to refinance, and then you're at today's rates where we're basically right around 4 now. So then not only do you have to pay these fees to refinance, now you have to refinance and you're in a higher interest rate. So there's a lot of things that go into that, but if you can do it by yourself, if you're not married, I mean, I think that's the smarter way to do it, just because it sets you up for a lot more issues down the road if something happens and you end up breaking up.
Right. And the other thing is too, is that, with people in blended families anymore, I've seen where somebody moves into a house, they're still married to another person. They move into a house with somebody else, and, and then it just creates all sorts of a mess. And I think the problem is that there's no easy, there's no easy way of doing this. I mean, there's just no, it's just not the same thing. And I think that the problem is that with the complexities of our society today, we really do not do very well in explaining some financial literacy to people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues that can go into it. I mean, the breakup situation where, the other thing that a lot of people do is they'll be separated, and technically they're still legally married. I run
Right.
into that issue a lot with people where someone's been separated, and it can even be a good clean breakup. Maybe they're just waiting for the courts to get the divorce finalized. Well, when that happens, if you're going and you want to buy a home on your own, if you're still legally married, your legal spouse in Ohio, because it's a dower state, still has to sign off on that purchase for you to buy, and they're not going to be on the title. So if it's not a good breakup, if especially if there's a lot of money involved in the situation or whatever, a lot of times people have to wait until the divorce is finalized, because if they broke up and everything's kind of ugly, then the other person doesn't want to do the other person a favor and sign off on that. Especially if it's a money situation where one person's trying to get a lot from the other, they're not going to sign off to let you buy a home, because if you're still legally married, they're going to want to be attached to that so they can get something out of it. So there's just a lot of extra stuff that can go into that if you're still legally married. I mean, I've seen it where people have been legally married for years, but separated for years, and it never really creates an issue for them until they're going to try to buy a home, because then they gotta talk to that person. I had a couple where the husband kind of ran away and disappeared, and the lady
Hey,
that was
Kevin,
buying. Mhm.
keep talking for a second. I need to step away for 1 second. Keep
Okay,
talking. I'll
that's
be
fine.
right.
Okay, yeah, you're fine. Yeah, I had a situation where the guy kind of ran away, and the wife never really told me that she was married, because she didn't consider herself married anymore. And we get towards the end of the transaction, and we end up finding out that she was still legally married, and they couldn't locate the guy because he had to sign off on the paperwork or be physically present at the closing. We still aren't at a point where we can do the title paperwork and notarizations online for home purchases. So the person has to be present at the closing, and we couldn't find the guy, so she couldn't buy a house because she had no idea where this guy was. It'd been years since she'd seen him last. So there's a lot of complications that can go into it when you're still legally married and not together anymore. So it definitely can make things easier just to do things on your own if you can.
Yeah, and I think one of the um I think one of the problems is too today is that one of the things that I'm not, that I don't see is, I saw a post, and tell me if I'm right, or if you believe this or not, because I've seen this a lot of things happen. Is that the two things that happen mostly in the most reason people get divorced is either money or sex. I mean, but money plays more of a lingering, or I don't know, whatever you want to call it. It brings um
More complications. It haunts you a little bit longer.
right, and I think that um I think it's I think the problem has happened is that one of the things that's going on is that a lot, we have couples counseling for, we have therapy for counseling for everything else, but why don't we not have financial literacy counseling for couples?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely something that should be brought up more. You a lot of the situations where you have either the wife or the husband or whatever you are, both male, female, whatever it is. I mean, when you have a situation where the one person's not working and staying home, a lot of times they have been raised where they just don't have the financial literacy, and they try to get out and do things on their own. And if it's a situation where one person's the breadwinner, the other person's going to be getting that alimony or child support or whatever it is, and the person that hasn't been paying the bills, sometimes they're completely lost, and they have no idea how to get that stuff going on their own, especially if you're married at a young age. I mean, I've seen it where people have been married for years and they split up, and whoever wasn't doing the financial stuff, they're just, it's like they're starting fresh and they have no idea what to do. I mean, something as simple as setting up your gas and electric and all that. I mean, some people honestly do not know how to do that. They've never paid bills like that before. So it can be a very complicated situation. You know, the same goes with people with their credit score. You know, that's not something that we touch on enough. You know, it's almost like it should be a requirement to graduate high school to sit through a credit class or something, so people know. I mean, a lot of people just don't realize if you don't have good credit, then you can't get a lot of things in life. Everything's more difficult when you don't have a good credit score. I mean, a lot of things depend on it. You know, even your car insurance rates. If you have a lower credit score, you're going to pay more for car insurance. So lots of things depend on that. Life is much easier when you have good credit, and people don't realize that if they have a credit card and they max it out, or if they miss a payment or they skip payments, I mean, that really, really impacts you. As long as you're making minimum payments on stuff, you're fine. But people don't realize how much of an impact it makes just to be behind and not make a payment. And most of the time when you call these companies, especially since COVID hit here, if you call them and say, hey, listen, I'm going through a hard time, can you give me more time? They usually are nice to you and they'll do that. The problem is people want to avoid the conversations. And if you're not picking up your phone and you're not relaying the information that you're going to be late, then they don't really care to help you, and they're going to hit you with a late payment. If you pick up the phone and ask for time on something, I mean, I've not heard of where companies aren't going to give you that. Now, if you're months behind, they're eventually going to hit you with the late. Yeah, of course, because you're not making a payment. But if you're days behind, or even probably up to 30 days, pretty much any company out there, whether it's a credit card, a mortgage, a car loan, they're going to give you that grace period.
Right. There's an old line from a banker, and I can't remember what the guy's name is, but I'll have to see, who came up with it. But he said, he was a banker, and he said, I have never moved to foreclose on anyone that was talking to us.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, that's super important. Communication. It's just basic communication.
And I think that I think one of the other problems is that, people also, the one thing that I've seen is that financial literacy doesn't look like financial literacy to a lot of people. And I think the problem is with it, it's just like, I'll give you the one thing I saw was that this woman was living with a guy too. And I thought that this was interesting. She was the landlord and he was splitting the rent with him. And she was the landlord, and they were both, splitting the rent, and she wasn't telling them that, which I think is kind of shady. But at the same time, I just think that, people as a whole just do not, they do not, as a whole, they don't study, they don't study, I'm not going to say it's financial literacy, but they don't study the dynamics of what a couple looks like, about how to do a budget. And I'll give you an example.
And there's no standard to it either. Everybody does things differently.
Well, I'll give you an example. I used to be a financial advisor, and I was a stockbroker and had, Series 6, 63, and 7. I sat down. I had one of my clients call me up. And he was in tears. So he says to me, George, I got to talk to you. I'm like, bro, and Steve, and I'll, her name is Steve and Kathy, and, I'll use their names. Kathy had right around $43,000 in credit card debt that she had not disclosed to him when they got married. And she was making payments on it, and she was making payments on it, but they had never discussed it prior to them getting married. And now she made good money. She was a representative at, sales rep at Sprint. And so she was making probably, 60 to 70,000. She had just led a very credit card rich lifestyle.
Yeah.
So they had applied for a mortgage, and and then they come back with their debt to ratio, debt to income ratio was because of that.
Yeah, of course.
And they, he was in tears, and I was like, Steve, how did you guys? They just never did. I was like, how did you guys not talk about this? We just never did. I mean, it just and I think a lot of that is that we don't talk about, we did a show a few years ago, and it was called Financial Infidelity. And, we talked about how, that couples can be, financially unfaithful, just as they could be, they could be, emotionally or physically unfaithful. And one of the things that
It's embarrassing too. I mean, you don't want to tell your significant other, if they're not aware of it, that you've got 40 grand in credit card debt. I mean, I wouldn't want to do that. I mean, that's a bad conversation. I mean, I wouldn't take it to the point where I'd get married and not bring it up. But
right.
It's definitely not a first date or even really a 6 month into a relationship conversation. That's definitely something that you should bring up before you're going to propose or get married, but it's not something you want to bring up. It's embarrassing. Nobody wants to admit they have a lot of debt like that. Yeah, it's just they want to hide it because everybody wants to pretend that they don't have debt and they're doing really well. No one wants to admit that.
Right.
It makes you look good.
Well, and here's the thing is that, once COVID hit and once COVID hit and there's a lot of people's finances came out. I mean, and we talked about this. I don't know, well, if you were on there or not, but we talked about this, is that how many people in Columbus had to relinquish property that people didn't know about. NetJets is an example. There are people that had to give up their airplanes. I mean, this has not been, people have made money, but also a lot of people have lost money.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
There's been some establishments that have closed down that, you would have thought that the people were making more money than they were, and they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things that, we brought up, and not to say that, it's the end all to be all, but, one of the things that we covered in the show, we're talking about, being financially unfaithful was the husband and wives do the same thing. Let's not talk, but the husband was spending $15 a day on lunch, going to lunch every day.
Absolutely. That's super common nowadays. People are spending that on delivery services too, with the DoorDash and the Uber Eats and all that. It's so convenient. People want to do it. I see people bank statements where they're making $15 an hour, and these people are spending $25 on a Uber Eats delivery. I'm thinking, what are you doing? You don't have any money here. Get to the grocery store, pack your lunch. No wonder you can't afford your bills and stuff. You're paying for a luxury lifestyle that you can't afford. It's people just want that convenience, and people just do not budget well. But yeah, the lunch and the dinner, I mean, you get that stuff delivered because you're too lazy to go out and shop it, and you're spending all your money on food and a delivery service. It's crazy.
Well, but it adds, it adds up because it's here's the thing that, and I'm not saying, listen, I don't want to poor shame people. Let's stop that. If I enjoy Starbucks coffee now and then, but guess what?
Mm-hmm.
I make my own coffee every day. I have I like a latte. I'm sorry. I mean,
yeah. No, I like that stuff too, but it's, it gets to a point where you're doing that daily and all of a sudden you're spending $300 a month on coffee. It's
right.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
I remember, I got to tell you, and I've shared this story before with people. I used to have an accountant that she was one of the best accountants ever. Her name was Kelly. And one month, when this is pre-COVID, now I post-COVID, I can't do this, but pre-COVID, I spent in 1 month $1,600 in eating out. $1,600. Now, mind you, some of that was from clients I had a Smith and Walensky bill there. I had
Yeah.
I had a Hyde Park bill in there. I had where was the other place we had gone to? There's a couple of them. There were
I mean,
three.
there's places if you got 4 people, that's $400 easy just
Yeah,
in one sitting.
yeah.
So
I mean, there was a couple of those. I mean, and then I had taken out some clients, and but she had itemized everything, and she said to me, and but we were also, there was, like I was going to Bob Evans like 3 times a week, but we were doing, I was having meetings there, and having sit downs, and before you know it, breakfast was costing me $35. Because
yeah.
and she says to me, and she said, George, I know you're making enough money to cover this. Are you getting $1,600 worth of value
Right.
from this? And I had to think about it, and that kicked me in the damn dick. And I was like,
That's a lot of money.
And the point of it is that when you're sitting there talking about this, I was like, do I have, is this enough of a value to do that? So I stopped, and I had to reconsider, the way I went about it. But I was seeing how I was spending money, not only how I was spending money, but where. And we sat down and went through every expense. And I was like, along with that $1,600, hold on, I'm going to do the math because I got to tell you exactly how much I'd spent. And
$1,600, you can almost hire a personal chef and have them come cook for you. It's a lot of money, and people don't do a breakdown often enough, and I'm guilty of that too. I mean, I should look at what I'm spending each month a little bit more carefully. It's when you've got credit cards, it's definitely easy to just swipe it and not worry about it.
Well, I was spending, I got to tell you this, out of that 1,600, I'd spent almost 200 at Starbucks. It was, because I was getting the same thing. I have a habit of when I was a Starbucks, I would order exactly the same thing. There's a coffee.
Most people do that. Yeah.
Yeah. One of their coffees is just my absolute favorite. But the point being is that, it wasn't what I was supposed to be spending on. And, like I said, I had gone almost to 200. It was like $192 that, because I was, there's 22 business days in a month. I was used to going on the way to work. I would stop at Starbucks, grab me a coffee and a roll. It was $8.
I mean, every single day.
And I was like, that's not a good thing. And I think that, at the end of the day that you have that you've got to think about is, not only your cash flow, but where you're spending money. And one of the things that I've seen, and you made, I want to say this about that. You made a good point about this, is if you're investing or, you're putting money, you're investing into how much of your investment money is getting you a good return. And, because you're talking about, there are a lot of people, for people that are listening, Kevin does a lot of, what do you call it? Investment property financing, for your, you guys have, the Revolution Mortgage does a lot of, not just residential, but you also do for,
people that want to buy something to rent it out to somebody else or whatever. Yeah.
Or
primary residence. It's people want to buy investment property. So we do that as well.
And so one of the things that, we covered is, that you talk about, or we talk about this, is that you have to understand where your money is going and how much money are you getting cash on cash back and on return. And then people don't do that. I mean, and it just, I don't know, because I think part of it is, I think that financing or finance is just, I think people are just, I don't know.
People are scared of it. It's just, it's totally, it's like another language to some people. A lot of people don't ever want to buy a home. They don't think about the investment aspects of that. they're okay with just renting. And they think if they buy a home, if something breaks, then they're going to end up spending more money on fixing a house. I mean, it's one of those things where just a lot of people just don't want to bother with it. It's people just want to pay somebody else and live somewhere and not worry about it. But it's a scary thing to talk about with some people. They just want to live their life with not having to worry about a home. But with how much values have gone up, it's buying a house is a great investment for you. $1,000 a month in rent, it's 12 grand every year that you pay to somebody if you don't own a home. And it's you've been renting for 2 years. That's $24,000 that you could have had equity in your own property. So
maybe, but I understand that one. That is an argument that people have had. Yeah, sometimes it's you're better off renting. Sometimes you're better off. Sometimes you're better off renting. Sometimes you are better off, investing, because if you look at capital expenditure, right? Renting gives you a fixed cost. Now, and Warren Buffett, and there's some other people out there that have said, hey, listen, if you, and John, you know who John Sestina is? Have you ever heard of him?
Mm-hmm.
John Sestina is a financial planner, and he has a school, he goes there. He said, sometimes it's cheaper to rent if you invest the difference, because, renting is a fixed cost based on, right. and all of it, at the end of the day, renting, investing, all of it is always it's capital allocation. It determines, where what your investments are going to be. I've seen people that are in a home and take Columbus out of the picture, but for historically, homes have appreciated 3%. There are people that have lived in apartments that are multimillionaires because they've invested their money outside. And everybody's, and when I say this is, if you listen to this, everybody's situation is different. So, if you are going to invest, the first thing I would say to this, and number one, go talk to a financial planner. You have to work backwards, because financial planning is always, you plan for 5, 10, 15 years in advance. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10? Where do you want to be in 15 years? If you can't answer that question, you are not going to get anything done. Number two, if you are going to, to buy a house, how much are you going to be, how long are you going to be in that house? Are you investing? Are you going to be in that house, for 20 years? And my dad said something to me, and the other day, because I fell down the stairs and my cat-like reflexes did not save me.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, I did. I wasn't, but he said, hey, listen, you're going to be, he moved into a ranch. And he said, one of the things he couldn't deal with was the fact is that he couldn't go up and down stairs anymore. And he said that same thing to me. He's like, you're going to get old and you're not going to be able to walk up and down the stairs. And I'm like,
it's definitely something to consider. That's why ranches are very popular. People want to downsize into a ranch, and a lot of times they're harder to find. So it's definitely something to think about, depending on how old you are when you're buying a home. Depending on how long you want to be there. Like you said, it might be smart to buy the ranch as your first home if you're planning on not moving again. Yeah, it makes a big difference.
Well, and I think
at least having the first floor laundry and the first floor master, I mean, that can help out too. If you have a 2-story home and you don't necessarily need to go upstairs or downstairs, that makes a difference too. If everything's on your first floor, where you can live on the first floor and not need to access the other rooms on different floors, that helps as well.
Right. Well, and I think the other, part of the other issue too is, by the way, Jose, thank you for tuning in, sir. Always appreciate it. I think part of the other issues got to be is that when you're sitting there talking about long term, you always have to think about what's your next step. And people, you can always make up money if you can always make up loss. What you can't make up is time. So, you know, and for those people listening, I want to kind of close on this. And if you have anything, J.C. Penney in his 60s was $2 billion in debt, went into a sanatorium because he had a breakdown, and at age 90 wound up retiring with $2 billion in assets and in his right mind. When he got out of the sanatorium, he went back to work for J.C. Penney. He built it into the empire he did. But the one thing that people forget about it is he also trained Sam Walton when he went back into work. Colonel Sanders was in his 60s when he developed KFC and died in his 90s or early late 80s, early 90s, almost as a billionaire. So you always have time to fix it if you figure out what you're going to do. I think the problem is with today is that there's so much information being thrown at people that you just don't know what, you don't know which direction to go. That's why, I always say to this, talk to the professionals, call Kevin, get a hold of him. He'll answer everything you have about mortgages and buying a house, what you need to do, what you not, and also he'll tell you what to do, but what not to do. Because sometimes what not to do will save you more money than what you should be doing.
Absolutely.
It's
hard to repair mistakes a lot of times. It's easier to ask and not make the mistake, because sometimes depending on the mistake you make, it can take a long time to get back from that. It really can.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, is there any final thoughts?
I don't think I have anything to add. I can throw my phone number in here again, so that way people can reach out if they want to.
Yeah. So if any of you,
I have no problem sitting down and having a phone call with anybody that has questions on stuff. Even if you're not planning on buying right now, if your lease is expiring in 6 months, get started early. Don't be that guy that calls me there where it's February and your lease is up in March and you think you're gonna find a house in time. It's not gonna happen. Sometimes there's things that we need to fix. So just do yourself a favor and get started early. It's definitely gonna be beneficial for you. You'll be thanking yourself later.
Yes, sir. Anyway, with that, thank you for listening to the VRS Warrior Wallet. Kevin, Laura, as always, you're a mortgage specialist extraordinaire, and thank you for supporting VRS and all of its shows. And Absolutely. We will catch you later on tonight. So,
thanks, guys.